Hello and welcome to the Ultra Fitness Training podcast for May 2011. Usually on the ULTRAfitnessTraining.com podcasts, we'll have about equal input from both William Sichel and myself, Shaun Brassfield-Thorpe. But this month, William is off to Hungary to take part in the Unix 6-day race, and so before he leaves, we've just got a quick question for him. What do you think is the most common mistake made by runners in training?
From all the inquiries I've had and that we've had through the ULTRAfitnessTraining.com site, I'd say the single most frequent mistake that we see is that runners are more or less one pace. Mm-hmm. All the sessions, yes, they're probably doing different. They're doing a hill session, they're doing a pace session, they're doing a long run, but you'll find that so often that the difference in the pace between all the sessions they're doing is very, very little. Mm-hmm. And in some cases they're almost doing everything in the same pace. Right. And they're not really aware of it. They think they're doing a speed session, they think they're doing a slow long run. When you look at the actual times and distances, mm-hmm. there's very little difference in the pace they're running. So in fact they're just running in one gear all the time. Mm-hmm. And they're just simply not exploring their athletics potential. They're not developing themselves physically or mentally. Mm-hmm. And that's I'd say the single biggest mistake that we see.
So you say that if an athlete looks at their training diary and their stopwatch and works out that the difference between their long slow run and the average speed in their long slow run and their speed work is about 1 kilometre an hour, it's probably not really working for them.
Yeah, I think they're missing something somewhere. Yes, definitely.
Fair enough. In this section of the programme, we're going to be talking about setting effective goals in training. Perhaps the first thing to say is that when we're talking about goals of this kind, we're not talking about ambitions and dreams, like wanting to be on your country's Olympic team or to be the first person to roller skate up Everest. What we're talking about is goals that you actually specifically hope to achieve in training. Exactly what those goals may be is going to depend upon the individual. For one person it might be to run faster, and for another person it might be to become stronger, and someone again might want to lose some body weight. Now those sort of goals are all fine, but one of the things about them is that they're not very clearly defined. And I'll begin with a statement. For a goal to be effective, it should be very clearly defined. If we look at the examples I just gave, something like running faster or becoming stronger or losing weight, although they're okay as a basic starting point, if you like having a block of marble that you're then going to chip away at to produce a more finished sculpture, they themselves aren't defined. Let's look at them. To run faster, fine, but what does that mean? What speed are we talking about? Over what distance? To become stronger, are we talking about on a single lift or a multiple range of lifts? Are we talking about squats or bench press, upper body, lower body? What are we talking about here? If someone wants to lose body weight, are they actually saying they want to lose body weight as a whole or body fat specifically? And in either case, how much? I mean, are we talking about half a kilo, 10 kilos? All of these things are important when you're assessing what your goals are and therefore how you should try and achieve them. So, if we start off with the idea that a goal should be clearly defined, one of the first things to do is look at what your goal is and then knock off some of those rough edges and define a little bit more. Hypothetically, someone might, for example, decide that what they want to do is run for 10 kilometres at a speed of 10 kilometres an hour. Now that's quite a clearly defined goal. You know what distance you're hoping to cover, and you know what speed you want to cover it at. And that's something then that you can definitely work towards. Once you've got a vague idea or more than a vague idea, a clear idea of what you're aiming for, it then helps sometimes to break it down a little bit further. One of the models that I often recommend is S.M.A.R.T, S-M-A-R-T. And SMART stands for specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timescale appropriate. So let's look at each of those. We've covered a little bit of the idea of having a specific goal. For example, not simply running faster, but running at a particular speed over a particular distance. With strength, for example, someone might decide they want to deadlift 100 kilos for 3 repetitions. That again is quite specific. It's not just a vague idea that they want to be stronger in some way. It gives a particular goal to aim for. With something like weight loss, a person might decide that they don't want to lose any muscle mass, but they do, for example, want to lose 3 or 4 pounds of body fat. Again, that gives a specific goal to aim for, and that's really important. Otherwise, it's very, very difficult to tell whether you're achieving your goals. I mean, let's say your normal running speed is 8 kilometres an hour, and over time you've got this up to 8.5 kilometres an hour. Obviously that's an improvement, but have you now reached your goal, or are you still a long way from it? It's very important to have a clear idea of exactly what you're aiming for. So that's the specific side. Now let's look at the measurable side. Okay. For example, speed is measurable, distance is measurable. The weight that you lift in the gym, that's measurable. The weight that you might want to drop from your body fat, that's measurable. Time, if you want to run faster, that's measurable. But, for example, concepts like looking good, or getting fitter, or something of that nature, those aren't measurable in concrete terms. And so a goal to be really effective is best set with a measurable component. So you can look at it and you can say, well, I don't know, I went into the gym and I bench pressed 5 kilos more than I did last time, and that's moving me closer to my goal. So that's S&M in SMART. Specific and measurable. The next one is A, achievable. Your goal should be achievable. I mean, firstly, to start with, it should be achievable for a human being under reasonable conditions. So, for example, most averagely fit people who don't have any particular health issues or injuries or some other limiting factor that's easily identifiable, most people could, for example, complete a marathon. Or, for example, with time and training, they could learn to squat their own body weight, something along those lines. These are achievable goals. On the other hand, running a marathon in an hour is probably just about impossible for absolutely anybody under any circumstances. It's the same with something like strength training, deadlifting 1.5 times your own body weight. If someone puts in the time and the effort and the practice, most people are probably going to be able to manage to do that. Deadlifting 10 times your own body weight, well, no one can do that. It has to be an achievable goal for it to be meaningful. And this brings us on to the R in SMART. We've had specific, measurable, and achievable. The R is realistic. Having decided that your goal is actually achievable, the next question is it realistic? To use a extreme example, if you happen to be 60 years old, weigh 120 kilos, live in the Arctic Circle, you've never danced before, and have minor arthritis, the chances of you becoming a ballerina are pretty slim. They're not actually realistic, even if it would be an achievable goal for someone else. It's the same in a more believable scenario. If you're setting out and perhaps you want to run your first ultra, or you want to increase your compound lifts in the gym, something along those lines, the question is your goal realistic for you as an individual? That's obviously something that has to be looked at on a case-to-case basis, because what's reasonable and realistic for one person may not be for another. But it's important to have this concept of setting a realistic goal. Maybe, let's say you've got a marathon time currently of 5 hours. Well, trying to get your marathon time down to 4.5 hours is probably realistic. Trying to get it down to 2.5 hours, well, that's possibly not very realistic, at least in a short time scale. And that brings us on to the T in S.M.A.R.T, which stands for timescale appropriate. If you set a goal, even if you've gone through the process of making sure that it's specific, measurable, achievable and realistic, another factor to consider is it timescale appropriate? Now let's take marathon running again as an example. Most people, even if they've not really done very much running before, can learn to cover a marathon distance. It's not probably very timescale realistic to say that it's going to take them 5 years to learn to do that, because if they were using decent training methods, they should be able to achieve that in a far shorter space of time. On the other hand, it's also probably not very timescale realistic to assume that they're going to do it tomorrow. A good goal has a reasonable timescale attached. What that timescale will be will depend on what the goal is, but, you know, one individual might think that completing a marathon after 6 months of training, say, that's a realistic goal. Someone might go into the gym with the idea that they're going to add 10% to their squat after a month. That, for an individual, might be a perfectly realistic goal, or it might not. It does depend. But regardless, the point to get across here is that your goal should have a realistic timescale attached to it, and you should be able to achieve your goal within that time. So, if you're looking to make your own training goals as effective as possible, try using the S.M.A.R.T model. First of all, decide what your goal is at a rough level, and then define it a little bit more, and ask yourself, is your goal specific enough? Does it contain qualities that you can measure and thereby assess your progress? Are you sure that your goal is attainable and realistic for you as an individual? And have you applied an appropriate time scale towards achieving that goal? If you do that, and you work hard at achieving your goal, checking your progress regularly, you'll probably notice that you achieve your goals a lot more easily in training and in your events. That's all for this time from the ULTRAfitnessTraining.com podcast, but William Sichel and myself, Shaun Brassfield-Thorpe, will be back again soon. In the meantime, please check out our website at www.ULTRAfitnesstraining.com. If you're interested in having a training analysis done by William and myself, or if you'd like us to design you a personal training program, then please get in touch by email on info@ultrafitnesstraining.com.